All right, we're back. We're live. This is probably the third interview today. Two great ones this morning. I'm really excited about this upcoming interview. This is going to be with Shane Wilson. He is a venture partner at Sita Capital based in Palo Alto. They focus on deep tech. They're a deep tech fund. Shane Wilson invests in the kind of companies most funds find too hard or too early. And as a venture partner at Sita Capital, they focus on deep tech firms backing AI, ML, robotics, fintech, and defense. And so he writes about and writes checks into frontier technology, and he's become a sharp contrarian voice on whether the robotics and AI hype actually pencils. And so I'm super, super excited to be speaking with him today. I've spent, 10 years in robotics myself. And so I think this is going to be a really fun one. Hey, Shane, what's up?
Sonny, how you doing, man? Good to see you.
I am doing well. Yeah, it's good to see you as well. What a fascinating background and what a crazy title, right? From the football field to frontier tech. I'm excited to get into this. I like to kick off with just kind of like what is Sita Capital? What are you guys building? What's your mission, vision? We'll keep it kind of short for now, but I promise we'll come back to it. Yeah, at the
Yeah,
last
for
third of this.
sure. Yeah. So we're early stage B2B AI deep tech robotics. So the way that I kind of frame us to founders, Sonny, is like we are nerdy generalists. The nerdy side, deep tech robotics. The general side is where we're doing a little bit more of the B2B AI. I think, just kind of, again, keep it brief. I think what's special about us is this is a small fund deploying from a pretty significant first fund, but we're a small group, 3 people. We're very operator and founder focused. And so for us, the right investment is not just making sure the numbers line up, but it's finding out like how a small team with some diverse backgrounds can really help companies go from where they are to that next phase. So really an operational kind of founder lens, I think, is where we take most of our, what we take most of our cues from as investors.
So let's start a little bit. I mean, I was reading about your background. It's fascinating. So you played football at Colgate, right? So what did that locker room kind of teach you that no classroom ever could?
Yeah. So it's been over a decade since I put a helmet on, but when you play football for that long, even at the Colgate level, like we weren't Michigan or Ohio State, we were playing at that FCS 1AA level. Your operating system is very football player. So whether that's the locker room or the weight room or the commitment, I think like just kind of like the attitude towards work and towards hard things is just like a very different attitude than most folks. But specifically, I think my football story is a little different than most. So, Colgate, while it's not at the top tier, it's a totally recruited school. Like everybody who shows up, they've been talking to the coaches for months to years, and when they show up on day 0, everybody knows pretty well where they're gonna land with their career. I was an anomaly. I was getting recruited by some other schools. It fell through, and I ended up being a walk-on. And typically, like a walk-on at a Division I program is like a glorified tackling dummy. Here's your Jersey kid. And good luck. Don't get beat up too fast. I didn't like ever kind of like listen to that expectation or heuristic. And just frankly, Sonny, like worked my ass off, and it worked out pretty well. I had a good career. Started for a lot of games there throughout my career until eventually my shoulder gave way. But I think that kind of like there was like a chip on my shoulder as part of that kind of journey, and I think that I carry that. And it's just kind of like you have to have a very deep seated confidence in yourself, even though the numbers may be stacked against you or people might not be thinking about you the right way. Just keep working when nobody's looking, and eventually they'll start thinking about you the right way. So I think that those are kind of the things that are still with me. Oh gosh, it's 2026. Yeah, 12-ish years later.
And take me back to before any of this. Growing up, what did young Shane think he was going to be?
Good question. I was a pretty focused kid. Um, I was like I was quite a good like liberal artist academically. Like I loved history, English, public speaking. Those were kind of places that were pretty exciting for me. I never really thought too much about it. Like once football came into focus. Like I was probably for those 5-ish years of high, 5-ish years leading into and through high school. That was like really where most of my time and energy went. Um, but yeah, Sonny, like I think actually like I grew up in a small town in New Jersey. It was like a farming town. Like we worked on farms and stuff. And I think like the whole kind of outside world, even though New York was only 50-ish miles away, it could have been 1,000 miles away, or kind of like big city civilization. So I don't think I had enough vision earlier as a kid. Frankly, it was just like, okay, do well in school and do well with football and things will work out. So I can't really, there hasn't been something up on my wall since a little kid. I guess, maybe paleontologist. I love dinosaurs. That was probably the first job I ever wanted. But that's, yeah, I don't remember much besides just like wanting to get on the football field when I was at least in that high school age.
And then you said she started out in enterprise sales, selling to banks, insurers, hedge funds. What did that grind teach you about how money actually moves?
Yeah, it is. I think it taught me that one, it was exciting to go into. I should say I fell into the sales career out of college. It was something where like somebody kind of recruited me and I did it and I was pretty good at it. What kind of drove me and what excited me on a day-to-day basis is like you are really at the front edge of business and learning how value gets created, and how decisions get made in companies. And that was something that was pretty inspiring to me, in that once I kind of got the first few sales down, and frankly, you get some beginner's luck and the Dunning-Kruger effect, all those things, but I became quite obsessed with going deeper and learning more, really understanding funnel mechanics and understanding how pricing strategies can impact the velocity of your business. So I kind of became a sales nerd pretty quickly. But how'd you frame the question originally? Sorry, I just started riffing there.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, you started up in enterprise sales, right? So, like, what did that grind teach you about, like, how money moves, right? It's like it's such an elusive thing, right? When you're in school, like, but when you come into the real world, especially in those kind of roles, I assume it gives you like this first, front row seat.
Grind is the right word. I think that's it. And I think that still sticks with me as an investor. Like your idea, like everybody has ideas. Ideas are exciting, they're fun, but everybody has ideas. Thus, they're frankly worthless in terms of the supply demand of the ideas market. Execution is everything. And in an enterprise sales, context, like you need to execute day in, day out, and even doing everything perfectly correctly. You get 100% on your activity report, you might not get any actual value coming into the company for that. And so like adopting that emotional resilience and that commitment to process is what enterprise sales really meant to me. But like as you said in the question, Sonny, like grind is the right word. You have to grind that out, and on the bad days you do it, on the good days you do it, and over time you start to see those results.
And you've said you spent years on kind of like the periphery of finance. When did you decide you wanted to be on the building side and not the selling side?
Yeah, so this was post-COVID. I'd been with a seed stage startup for like 3 or 4 years at this point, and we'd done a lot of good things on the revenue front. We had to execute a full pivot during the pandemic from like recruiting services and technology towards ed tech, just to kind of keep our lights on. And from a sales perspective, it's like, man, there's a lot of really exciting things that are happening, but the fundraising part, kind of like really boosting up our valuation, we kept missing the mark there. And so like I just kind of pulled on that thread a little bit and said like, well, why do some companies get funded and other companies don't? And if it's not just revenue, what else happens? And the whole kind of inquiry led me to like a little bit of just an evaluation where I said, listen, I love deal making. I think that is like still like a really exciting part of the sales job. I want to make deals on a bigger plane. Right now I'm just kind of doing this on a product basis for individual companies. And when you get into proper finance, whether you are M&A or early stage VC, everything in between, this is where your deals are at the company level. And those things start to get more complex and more exciting. And that is what kind of made me realize that to get into that space, I had some serious skill gaps. And so for me, the right answer was to go back to school, get my MBA, and really kind of spend some time in the classroom to catch up the like deal making and relationship building with what makes a good investment.
And what was it about technology specifically that pulled you in?
I think it was the speed and the lack of, you know, what's interesting about technology is increasingly so. And especially, you know, we can, you know, there's no debate of this after the AI era, but like there's not much to be said about having 15, 20 years of experience. So when I landed in 2014 into a tech company, what I recognized is like, you know, there's people who know how to do a job better, they're better managers, they're better leaders, but like, what is this business and what could it be? Like, nobody actually knows. And so as a young guy, that meant like I could make an outmoded impact beyond just the years that I had on my resume. And that's what was really exciting at first. Now, as a less young guy, it's this need for constant reinvention and reevaluation that I think is really exciting. You cannot really get stuck in your ways. You have to always be on your toes, thinking about getting your skills better, you know, kind of looking for patterns from old things that you may have learned with kind of new environments. So I think it's just that constant state of change has really always kept me engaged and excited in a way that working in an old, steady, figured out business, I don't see that kind of happening over there.
And looking back, which part of your like pre-venture life prepared you most for picking winners?
Ooh, you know, I think it goes back to football, honestly. And so, you know, what I'd say here, Sonny, is, um, yeah, I've been reflecting on this a lot recently. I work with startups, and I would say that good leadership is not a sufficient condition for a startup to succeed, but bad leadership is a sufficient condition for a startup to fail. And why does this go back to football? Well, if you think about a football team, or especially like a college football team, there are 100 players. They're 18 to 22 years old. They're just leaving home. There are so many distractions and opportunities and things, and they're growing and adapting and changing. And the coach's job is effectively like a CEO and kind of, you know, a hierarchy of managers around that. And leadership is what's really critical. And this is why guys like Nick Saban were successful for so long. They're just excellent CEOs and or managers as they move through. And so it's that leadership that really, I think, was always kind of the difference between a great season and a bad season, a good team and a bad team. And, you know, that is like really true in startup land too. So I think like, you know, it may just be like one of the things that you can get caught up in the spreadsheets and the TAM sizing and how cute this idea is and the competitive evaluation. But there is something about like when you sit down across the table from that person that like, if you say like, I could follow them, they're articulating something clearly that I understand and I can execute against if they're not right here. And, you know, they're going to have enough of an investment. Like I believe in this person, or I want to be or emulate this person in a way. That leadership part, I think, is just really critical, and I don't think you could talk about it enough, especially as an early stage investor, when so much of what you're investing in is that founder.
Interesting. And was there a person early on who changed how you saw your own potential?
There's been a couple. You know, I'll give some shine to a mentor of mine early in my career, who unfortunately has passed away. His name was James Waite. He was my first, he was the global director of sales at General Assembly. So this was my first gig out of college. This guy kind of like hired me on the spot when I interviewed with him. And he took a real interest in me. And I think what he recognized was that there's different types of sellers, and to kind of like oversimplify, I think there's some sellers where it's like, this person is, give them a playbook, they will execute it, they will run it until the cows come home, and they'll smash their head against the wall until it works. And then on the other side, there are some kind of more like cerebral or brainy salespeople that need to make it their own, and they need to kind of be engaged and excited in different ways. And I think I thought I was the first salesperson coming from an athletics background, and James recognized that was the latter. And he really pushed me and coached me to kind of go deeper, go farther, and try some new things. And that was like one of the first people that said like, hey, you could really have a career and be really good at this sales thing, and help me kind of go beyond the basics, and kind of understand that there was much more behind kind of, we're much more beyond what meets the eye, with the career. And I think that's what really kept me engaged for at least that first decade of my career.
So just to switch gears a little bit, right? So you founded Giraffe Financial around kind of like the Inflation Reduction Act. So what did building your own company teach you that you couldn't learn as an
Um,
investor?
no, actually, that's a miss on
Oh,
my
my
part.
bad. You kind of flagged that. My bad. Yeah. Was clean energy part of your history?
It was briefly. So when I went into business school, my kind of first bite of the apple for VC is I wanted to be a climate tech VC. And so
Mm,
Draft Financial was one of the companies that we were involved with through a venture fund called Skyview Ventures, where I interned as an MBA.
got it.
So
Got
we
it.
were kind of we were clean tech, kind of new energy. Um, Learned a lot with those guys. Really appreciate them kind of giving me my first professional experience in venture, and learned like, hey, climate tech as of 2023, 2024 wasn't the right fit for me. And I think like
Mm,
in that particular era, like this is when I would say we were probably like peak climate tech, kind of peak bubble. There's some things that didn't make sense to me. And there were just like a lot of businesses that were so tightly tied to IRA incentives. When in the summer of 2024, I started asking some questions like, hey, what happens if the election goes red? Well, the election's not going to go red. What happens if, IRA gets defanged? Oh, that'll never happen. I kind of sensed at that point, like there was a little bit of a cult around climate tech that was forming that was kind of like burying its head in the sand from the business reality and the political reality. And that, I think was just like a core risk that while I didn't have the ability to articulate that at that point, it was quite real and it did play out pretty well. Now, if we look at, maybe we don't call it climate tech anymore, but energy investment, that's still very real and there's great economics there. What is the infrastructure of energy? And those investors of today are speaking in much, I think, more rational terms, where we're looking at how much do things cost, who's paying for what are some of the challenges to deploying these technologies. So yeah, there was kind of a brief time there in clean tech or climate tech. I'm less interested in kind of that vintage of thinking, but definitely when it comes to like the real nuts, bolts, wires, transformers of energy and energy infrastructure, that stuff's pretty interesting.
yeah. I totally agree. So you went back to school at Yale, right? At a point when I guess most people are settling in. Like, what were you, I guess, chasing?
Yeah, I was, old for my MBA. Like I came in, I was 31 years old for my MBA, which probably put me like 2 to 3 years above the median. So, it was me and a bunch of military veterans who were kind of at the upper end of the distribution. What was I chasing? What was I doing? So, I was pretty burned out post pandemic. It was a tough ride through a hard pivot with the startup. I was managing a lot of people that were just having, all their own life problems associated with what was a very big black swan event. And so the combination of like keeping the company, hitting company goals and helping people through their personal stuff, like 3-ish years of that, Sunny, man. And I was like, I needed a break. And I think that was kind of where it said like, hey, it's time to revisit some of the old goals. And I had kind of always said, I need another bite at the apple for academics. I want to go back to school. And I didn't know if that was going to be law school or business school or something else. And so it was the right time for me to kind of step off the field for a little bit. But it was also what I felt was like the right way to really dedicate the brain space to building a new skill set and executing a career pivot. Like kind of transitioning from pure play operator, seller, marketer to investor. I thought I needed a pretty clean break for a while to kind of turn off that part of my brain and activate the next part.
Got it. Interesting. So walk me through the moment you decided deep tech and robotics was where you would plant your flag.
Yeah, had a lot to do with defensibility. You know, when we look at AI right now, the pace of change is so fast that picking one, software may even be a dirty word right now, but picking one asset light solution versus another is a really hard thing. I mean, like back in December, January, so much of the AI conversation and AI coding conversation was Cursor. Well, now it's Claude, and even since 5.5 Codex is coming in there, like this is a very big, expensive game, and like one thing is just getting crushed by the next. And how do you kind of break out of that cycle? Well, if everyone can vibe code against each other, like we're going to see a market where kind of value collapses. Where defensibility can come in are things like supply chain. Do we have access to kind of like truly innovative engineering breakthroughs? Is this a hard tech plus a software innovation? And so it just kind of felt like a place where the rewards may not be as quick, especially in these kind of heady times when valuations are just totally exploding. But if you can learn it, you can differentiate yourself as an investor and invest in some companies that could better differentiate themselves. So, kind of looking at the table as I graduated from business school last year, it's a great time to kind of start a new chapter. And it felt like, hey, that's a big part of the next story that I want to tell. I want to figure out how we help AI break out of the screen. And I think that's still kind of like a big picture driving motivation that gets me out of bed every day.
You've written that a 500K robot can mean a 7-year payback. When did you start seeing through the hype everyone else was buying?
Yeah. So with robotics, I think labor replacement is just like this is where you have to have that sobriety when we look at these concepts and these ideas. There are mega funds out there or mega companies out there that can burn billions of dollars to bring some exquisite solution to market. So we were talking to our friend Charles last week about the Optimus and Tesla robots. Like those guys are in a different stratosphere. We talk about the funds that they have access to, the engineering capabilities, the supply chain. Like, hey, if somebody's going to win humanoids, Tesla's a pretty good bet. At Cita, we're not at that level, and so we really need to look for different wins that are maybe a little less obvious. And many of the things that we started looking at, Sonny, are like, I remember one pitch. It was a robot arm being used to help move luggage in the back of an airport. Okay. Now this is something that like, hey, we could imagine like a fully automated back office for an airport can move things faster. We could scale up. We can help people avoid injuries. But the truth is that was the hardware was a $500,000 FANUC arm with some sophisticated vacuum suckers to pick up these bags. And when you started to play the videos, you recognize that they're about half as fast as human workers. Those human workers make $15 to $20 an hour. So think about like even if they doubled up their speed, which would be materially challenging from an engineering standpoint to get this as accurate and as fast as a human, that reward isn't that good. And this is what like I think robotics investors and robotics founders really need to think about. The place where I think this breaks down the most are like robot housekeepers, right? Like, yeah, that's great. Everybody wants to get to where the Jetsons were in the 1960s with a robot housekeeper, but like, let's think about a housekeeper. They have maybe 8 different tools, whether it's the vacuum, a Swiffer, something to spray, something to wipe. Each one of those tools is different context for a robot to master right now. And a housekeeper is, again, a $15 to $20 an hour labor cost. So you need to build an exquisite robot, and there's not like a huge return, especially on those first couple customers. You're going to have to build an exquisite robot at scale to really make an attractive investment here. That feels like it's years away in multiple investments. So if we kind of make a 2x2 here and we put these guys, housekeepers down in this part of the matrix, what's up here tend to be really simple jobs that we pay a lot of money for, often because they're dangerous. So think about a pipe fitter. Pipe fitter, like their primary job is tightening and loosening bolts. They have to be good at it. They have to know what risks they have as they tighten and loosen these things. That context can be loaded up into a robot. And if something goes wrong and the robot gets hurt, there's not an insurance claim. That's kind of a big part of why these jobs are so expensive. So underwater welding, right? Super dangerous, but the task itself is not that complex. Like that's where robotics starts to get exciting. So I think just like if we take a really quick sniff test and say like, what is the reward for doing this job well? The robotics market becomes, kind of this very cleaved like barbell where there are exquisite systems that are like many years in the future, and then there's kind of simpler labor replacement robots that are really good bets now. And I think that's where we're most interested at the moment at Cita Capital.
Got it. Got it. So you talk about kind of like the Gen AI divide, right? How most companies trying AI and quietly failing. What was the insight that made that click?
The insight, so you're saying the Gen AI, so with respect to large companies, like and how they're not doing well integrating it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, let's see. One, if you are a founder and maybe you founded your company in 2018, 2019, you built it based off SaaS assumptions and SaaS economics, you could have built a pretty strong business that was kind of along the curve, and the curve suddenly got disrupted. Couple challenges there. One, you probably staffed up in a way like our staffing assumptions around SaaS companies have been completely broken. And I think as investors in both private and public markets, as we accepted very quote unquote fat companies where you had hundreds of engineers, they got paid very well, and because the margins were insane in these software businesses, they got a pass. So you're going to have to change your workforce, which is painful and really hard. And if you're a founder that's been on the road with that team for a long time, that can be a pretty tough decision to make. So that's one thing, just like how do you actually staff? Because the reality is, even if that team was great, if there's 50 to 70 people, that organization is going to move slower than a 5 to 7 person, AI team that we do see as viable right now. So there's one part of the Gen AI divide that's coming in. When it comes to the enterprise and accepting some of these products, that's like a very active conversation that like I love talking to founders about. So I don't know, Sunny, like any of your companies, are you seeing any kind of like ways that the enterprise is hitting some friction or needs to change their thinking on Gen AI? I'm interested to hear your thoughts, and then I'll share mine.
Most of my work tends to be with founders at early stages, less with enterprise. It is an area that I think a lot about, and that's why I was, curious to ask you. I mean, at the founder level, obviously, it's becoming ubiquitous, and AI is kind of becoming table stakes. I know this morning in the gym, I was talking to a couple buddies, and I was telling them like, I think I do more in a day than I did in 3 months. Like 2 years ago. It's just incredible how empowering it is. But yeah, but I don't. I like to be frank. I don't know a whole lot about what's going on in terms of enterprise AI.
Yeah, well, it's too slow. Like I think like
Mm,
the prizes have not been distributed in enterprise yet. That's for sure. There are some kind of strong prosumer models where like, Sunny, if you worked for Adobe, maybe you're, kind of secretly working with your Claude on the side and you're doing things 5 or 10x better. But like really the org-wide adoption is very low right now. Some of this has to do with the products, and those are going to change. And I have confidence that founders are going to change that really quickly. What I think is more interesting as an investor and as an investor with a go-to-market lens is like, how do we break down old procurement thinking? Because procurement right now has been pretty well trained on a SaaS model that's like per seat, right? Well, per seat doesn't work when the execution layer of the economy is no longer people. What is more interesting and more exciting are things like outcomes-based pricing. But I, as a procurement officer, don't like that there's variability and I can't say for sure how my budget fit, right? So there's this disconnect of how decisions get made and what the products can do. And really helping either break that down or kind of ease procurement or ease enterprise buyers into this brave new world. I get really excited by founders who are doing that, who are experimenting with the business model. And the business models are like, they're better for the customer, they're better for the company. And we just need to kind of jettison some boring old paperwork and rules around what we buy and how we pay for them. So I can go deeper on that, but that's where I'm like this really kind of like thing that's always like the last part of the process. Like this is actually breaking what could be like a huge breakthrough for just about every company I think in the world if we get more creative with how we pay for our providers.
Interesting. So setbacks, deep tech, others find too hard or too early, right? So what kind of founder makes you reach for the checkbook?
Yeah. So, all right, your deep tech founder probably needs to have either a strong academic background or has been working in an environment with kind of next generation engineering or science for a long time. So, oftentimes there's a PhD in play, or you worked at somewhere like Facebook, for example, as part of the engineering team, maybe, an OpenAI or an Anthropic. Those backgrounds are pretty good proxies for people who have been on the cutting edge and recognize what cutting edge is. So that's part of it. But Sunny, like there's a lot of people that work for those organizations. There's thousands to millions of people who get PhDs every year. So again, it's not a sufficient marker to say, hey, has PhD from Carnegie Mellon, will invest. The things that are going to make, if that person has those boxes checked, what's going to kind of separate them or get them excited? Number one is storytelling capabilities. So often the deep tech founder thinks if I am the best of the best at my field and I'm the great engineer, the great scientist, everything is going to take care of it. Back to something I said at the beginning of the call is like leadership, getting people to understand that and buy that, whether that's as a worker or as a customer or as an investor, is a really big skill that I think a lot of deep tech founders, overlook. So do you have the pedigree? Do you have the ability, for me as a non-pedigree person, to understand this pretty quickly? That is a huge determinant on whether or not this company is going to ever get out of the gates. After that, things that you're going to kind of do as a standard investor. Have you ever launched anything before? What's their operational background? Have they ever actually built anything? There's a lot of very smart people that are coming out of, undergrad or maybe even dropped out of undergrad, that don't actually, they've never actually built anything or done anything. That's a pretty expensive lesson to teach people, but there's a special pedigree in deep tech. But what really separates the wheat from the chaff is like, explain this thing to me in a way that I understand it. And that's usually what gets us to game on to the other parts of the investment process.
You're loud about AI for small and medium businesses. Why is that the opportunity that nobody's pricing right now?
Huge. This is I think of this, I know you're in Toronto, but I think of this, in terms of the United States, like there is so much air being sucked out of the room by the Bay Area startup and the Bay Area AI application, and how fast, this company sells to that company, upstairs in startup HQ and then across the street. And they're very sophisticated engineering teams. And we all just kind of keep doing this thing and we spiral all the way up in valuations. And like, that's the game, that's the moment, that's how the Valley operates. But when we think about it, it's a big country. Between New York and San Francisco, there are a ton of really valuable businesses that have largely been skipped by the SaaS era. The tools were too expensive. They took too much brain damage to make them add value to a business. I'm an operator. I'm not going to bother like having to learn Salesforce. I'll just like have this crummy spreadsheet and I'll do it myself. There are so many businesses out there that operated that way. Now, the agentic AI development cycle means that you can be a system of record and a system of action that will amplify that operator immediately. That's a different value proposition than buy another tool per seat pricing. These systems can become more contextualized and better verticalized, such that out of the box, they're providing value. One of our best investments is in a company called Avoca. Avoca, over $1 billion valuation, recently raised. They're providing voice agents for home service providers. So your HVAC, your plumber, your electrician, like that is a huge TAM. And the ability for these voice agents to answer the phone for, someone calls to the desk and wants to schedule the next appointment, that is a very high value activity. So it's like, there are just like all of these businesses that have like, they need these things. And founders are just a little too distracted by what's happening, right out here in the Bay or in these different tech hubs. Looking further afield, there are really big prizes to be won.
Interesting. So everyone's funding humanoids, yet you ask whether they pencil, right? So what like robotics actually makes sense to back today? And you touched on it a couple times, but if it's not humanoids, because I mean those things like care, you're talking about taking care of the house and cleaning up and things like that. Like those can all be technically taken on by a humanoid, right? That's kind of the fact that it's potentially so general and it fits the human form makes it by definition ready to take on a myriad of tasks, especially if you have infinite intelligence or something close to it inside. So I guess if you're going to swerve outside of that, what are the areas, I guess, that you're seeing kind of the biggest opportunities outside of what you spoke about?
Yeah. I mean, like, look, if you had infinite intelligence, if you had brilliant engineering, if this thing was not dangerous to be, these are big ifs, right? Big
Right.
ifs. I'm confident they'll get solved eventually. Whoever solves them deserves a great prize. I don't know how, is that 10 years, 5 years, 15 years? Big question marks there. Okay, what does get exciting? What does get funded? I'm going to go back to our portfolio again and hype up a company of ours called Batrista. Batrista, if you looked at it, you'd say that's a robot. This is an automatic beverage creation robot. It's an automated beverage system. So if you imagine, kind of almost looks like a refrigerator. You go up and you press a button and it's going to put a drink out. No, there's a cappuccino machine in the bottom of my building that does that. Well, where Batrista comes in is it is actually a robot behind the hood. So it looks like a refrigerator on the front with a button and a spout, but under the hood, we're talking about a real AI system that's able to do things like blend fresh ingredients such that you can have a perfectly executed boba tea with a single button. Now, that has been actually incredibly valuable for QSR, quick service restaurant providers. We help connect these guys to Jollibee, we've made some introductions into these guys, including Jollibee Foods, that like these things are ripping across Asia right now. And this is just like a beautiful labor replacement story, because a QSR restaurant, you need to get up to value for your employer in about 15 minutes, I think is what it is. Learning how to make that boba tea, well, maybe it takes me like a couple weeks to do it. After I do it, I get tired of this job and I leave and I go to the next spot. So the kind of ability to quality control on these quite high margin products is a huge challenge for the QSR operator. Batrista is an opportunity to kind of plug into your business model and immediately start basically expanding your margins capability. And so like, this is complicated. There are computer chips in this thing. It is AI. It is happening. It doesn't look like, R2D2. Well, it looks a little more like R2D2. I should say it doesn't look like C3PO, but like this is the kind of robot that like this is embodied AI in the market today. It doesn't need to look like us for it to be embodied AI, but this is a real company making real dollars for real businesses that is bringing AI out of the computer screen. So Batrista, check these guys out. Awesome company, awesome founder. And I think that they're a really good example of that kind of simpler or kind of less sexy, really strong labor replacement economics robot out in the market today.
Very interesting. You spent time in defense and civil resilience. Why does that matter now in a way maybe it didn't 5 years ago?
It has to do with the funding. So, for me, I don't have a military background, but I did have an opportunity to meet a ton of veterans, understand kind of what their workflows and their lives were. And I'm incredibly grateful to veterans across all forces that help, help in the United States and beyond. But why defense tech? So, Sonny, there's kind of this history of VC that has been, I think, largely forgotten in the last 10 to 15 years. And that most of the biggest waves in venture capital started off as government-funded projects, and more specifically, defense-funded projects. This is true of, semiconductors. This is true of the internet. We can go again and again and again. The cycle, and this is, I'm kind of riffing off of like a Carlotta Perez here, but like the cycle basically starts with the government provides non-dilutive funding to quite out there ideas where there's, it's very, very far from commercialization. But because the government is not looking for financial returns, they're able to say, if this became part of our, economy, our national economy, it would grow and it'd be big. So they're not looking to get a payback in a couple of years. And for the first couple of years of these innovations, the government is the primary customer. With time, as the solutions become more sophisticated, commercial players come in, and the government spending kind of stays flat. Let's say, at this point, it's like 20% commercial, 80% government. And with time, the commercial really grows. So when the market explodes around these innovative technologies, the government was kind of the prime funding. Like they primed the pump here, and then commercial comes in and things really get to take off. We forgot about that for about a generation of venture capital, roughly around the time when Facebook and Google came in. The Valley kind of turned its head on the defense stuff and said, "Oh, we don't want to play over there." But this is how it's happened in the past. And today, when we look at kind of what DoD, DOW is doing, especially through some organizations like AFWorks and SpaceWorks, there is some really exciting, huge TAM opportunities that are getting funded that VCs should really pay attention to, because this is this is one of the few patterns we can look back on, and I think we can invest against. So space is like a perfect example where I think we're probably in that 20% commercial, 80% government spot for space technology. I think we're going to see that explosion happen here in the next 5-ish to 10 years, which makes it the right time horizon for VCs to be paying attention. But, long, short, Sunny, paying attention to defense, if you want to build physical products that are going to move, that are actually like atoms moving around the world, I think this non-dilutive government spending is absolutely where you need to cue in, because VCs have just gotten too lazy off of the software style returns, asset light models.
So when a deep tech pitch hits your inbox, right? What's the first thing that tells you it's real and not a science project?
Revenue. That's it. That's it. The biggest difference. There are just great science things that are happening all the time. I get my Yale email every day of amazing things that they're doing in the different labs there. Did you find people to pay for it? That's the difference between are you making money? Are you not? Science project versus a business. So that's probably the fastest, quickest answer I'll give to you.
So if you're right about where AI and robotics go next, what does the world look like, let's say in 10 years?
Smaller companies that are doing more for their customers. So if the past SaaS era was predicated on finding the one Salesforce to rule them all, now I think that we're going to see 10 to 15 different CRMs for legal tech. And each one, has a pretty good business in a 10 to $50 million range. They have strong margins. They kept a good eye on their cap table and their costs. And it's a great business that doesn't need to be $500 billion to be successful. So I think we're going to see more dynamic entrepreneurial technology companies where, Sunny, maybe you run 3 different vertical AIs as the CEO. You have a small team behind them. You guys have an awesome business around it, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the business or category killer in any space. So I think get ready for more entrepreneurialism. We have distributed the ability to build, and that's going to unlock creativity that's pretty tough to model right now. And we'll definitely break some assumptions for what good investment looks like.
Do you think that those will be venture backable? Doesn't venture always look for those unicorns?
We will have to change. Much of the private.
Cool. Okay.
Sunny, we're talking about $1 trillion IPOs. The venture market that was built is broken. Go back and, Bill Gurley was writing about how a $1 billion startup was a problem 10 years ago. Now we're at $1 trillion startups. We're seeing all the funding concentrating into a small number of funds who are now raising $15 billion funds. God bless you. I would love to fundraise like that. But at a $15 billion fund, think about the checks that you need to write. Think about the returns that you can offer. We're already broken space of venture. So yeah, there is some rethinking. Maybe this feels a little bit more like a lower middle market private equity investment. But I think like in the same way, procurement people and enterprise need to adapt to the times. VC, private market and public market investors need to adapt to the times too.
Very interesting. So you write in public, and help me land the plane with this one, right? So you write from what I saw almost every week while investing full time, right? So why does putting your thinking out there matter to you?
Yeah, because if you sound dumb, you're gonna hear it. I think that's what it is. It's a forcing function. But no, I mean, like actually, when you sit down and you write, you tap into a different part of your brain that makes thoughts flow more fluidly, and you have to kind of beat yourself up a little bit. So when something gets out there and it's finally a published piece, like there's still probably a ton of wrong assumptions, but I at least worked through everything that was in my head and put it out there. And I think that. Everybody thinks they're pretty smart, right? But if your ideas aren't out in the idea space and people aren't interacting and you're not talking about them, you have no real benchmark for it. So like put your ideas out there. It forces you to become a better thinker. It forces you to kind of become more clear with your thought, and really kind of wrestle with yourself a bit. So I recommend everyone should be doing some type of long form, Sonny, like you're a podcaster doing this in the spoken word, or if you're a writer, like this is really what makes you sharp. And it is not about prompting AI 100 times. It's actually about doing the hard stuff where your reasoning is driving what the model is making. So yeah, get out there and write, get out there and think, and maybe read an old book with pages every once in a while. There's a lot of alpha to be had there in the AI era.
Yeah, I took my little ones to the library this past weekend, and the librarian told me that we could supposedly take 100 books. And so I told my kids, I'm like, all right, 20 books a pop. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah, it was pretty fun. I came home with like 9 AI books that I'm like geeking out on. Totally agree, man. Reading is the way. Very, very unique and interesting perspective. Much of it, I really can't dispute. Thank you, Shane. You've been so kind. For everyone listening to us live, almost 17 people. Thank you very much. Shane, where do people learn more about Sitek Capital? Where do they tune into your, wave thought, wave consciousness, writing, and all that? Tell people that, and then we can bring this one to a close.
Find me on LinkedIn. That's my number one kind of channel for
Perfect.
distribution right now. I always promote what I write on Substack through there. If you want to get closer to the source, I write both my personal Substack as well as Sitek Capital Substack. But LinkedIn is the right place to just focus on. That's where I always publish stuff.
Awesome. Well, with that said, I'll bring this one to a close. Shane, just hang back 1 minute. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.
Thanks, Jenny.